Dan here. So in this case study, we're going to look at a company called V-Farm. So these guys are a plant-focused advanced horticulture company based in the UK. So what they do is all aspects of vertical farming. I'm guessing the V stands for vertical. So if we have a look at their products, they do consumables, actually make the racks that configure vertical farms, and they also have some standalone products, so these kind of retail units for vertical farming. And I had a good dig around their website. So if we click on this section here, sort of buried in this section, they've got this interesting area called ROI. So straight away, I think this is quite interesting to look at. So return on investment, let's have a look. This to me is the copywriting and kind of sales gold, because ultimately the social missions and so on are important, but the ROI is really, to me, the kind of standout area for your sales copy. So they've got all of these different ideas going on for ROI. Tiny yield times big cost equals poor return on investment. High yield times lower cost equals good ROI. And I have this calculator here which talks about comparing traditional tables with moving tables. So these are your racks, and then with the V-Farm system. So you can see there's some kind of benefits here in terms of your growing space per meter. So already you can start to see that there are ways to express these in more kind of catchy, attention-grabbing ways. So it's all a bit technical at the moment. This section's quite interesting, which is, so they have a patented rack system, which is basically this moving rack. So they have their stacks of shelves on this completely moving system, and what that means is they only need one aisle because they can basically move the racks to create an aisle space when and as you need it, compared to having all these fixed aisles in between every row of shelving or every kind of unit of racking. So according to this, that gives you up to about 30% increase in yield, and that's purely from space efficiency alone. So that's pretty big. And I think they could make a lot more of this idea. So I had a look also at their product catalog, and again they talk about this, the advantages of having this patented system. So let's see if we can just have a look at this. It's a bit tricky to navigate your way around. So the X's represent dead space, basically, losing money in aisles. So that's dead space, wasted space. So I really like this idea, but I think they could make a bit more of it. So I'll show you a project which I did previously. So this is clarifying some of the scientific information for a company I used to work for, Advanced Invasives. This is just a screenshot of their white paper. So you don't really need to know too much about the details, but basically they had a bunch of scientific work, field trial research work. And what I did in this was just kind of summarize it visually to kind of bring out the value of that work. So we had these different treatment blocks at different times of the year. And you could write this all in text or put this in a table, but it was just nice to show it visually to kind of draw out the nature of the project in a bit more kind of attention-grabbing way. And likewise, I can't actually show you the page, this is just a screenshot. So this project had a bunch of different experiments. So I represented those visually in this diagram down here. And then how those experiments, how the sampling for each block of experiments took place. So you can see here there's these 6 kind of random samples within the sampling block. So these are all ideas that you could quite easily bring into a case study. And I started writing that case study, just a draft of it, with this idea of the kind of aisle versus profit hook. So are aisles eating your profits? And the answer is, if you don't have this system, probably they are. So it's really easy with all the ag tech stuff to get drawn into all the kind of high tech LEDs, nutrient mist, aeroponics, and all the rest of it. But actually, what I really like about VFarm is you can go right back to the basics and say, look, the racks and aisles are where you can make or lose huge efficiencies in your farm. So, let's bring that to the fore as a kind of hook to start getting you interested in not just vertical farming, but why specifically this system is preferable to the other vertical systems out there. So to kind of develop this idea of aisles eating your profits, I've kind of used it as a springboard to go into this secondary idea of, what is the pattern of a farm? So for traditional arable, it's crop yield per field acreage. And if we apply that to vertical farming, it's crop yield per floor area. And then in turn, there's this pattern, this rack aisle pattern. And there's a kind of formula to the number of racks and the number of aisles. So you can already start to see here, there's a quite concrete way to understand the dead space in your farm. And you could get some statistics related to this. That'd be good for a case study. And in short, you're basically saying, look, if you're wasting space on aisles, this is bad, and there's a lot of downtime where you're not even using that aisle space, so this is even worse. And the whole point of vertical farming is to remove the system inefficiencies by design, not just go after gains from better technologies, so efficiency gains from, say, LED lighting. And then the resolution of the problem is VFarm's system removes this concrete problem, this rack aisle problem, and this is how it does it. So you just slide them out of the way. It's easy and it's safe. Interestingly, that's something they mention in their brochure, that having a smaller system, let me see if I can find it for you. So not having a really high multi-tier system is actually beneficial because you don't have to rely on cherry pickers. Yeah, here we go. You don't have to rely on these kind of health and safety governed ways of harvesting your product. So I'm not sure whether that is, there will be other vertical farms who will go the opposite route and say, well, actually, this gives us much more efficiency per floor area. So I think you can argue the case both ways. And it's interesting, this is the only company that I've seen that's actually argued that higher shelving is actually a negative when it comes to vertical farming. So that's an interesting angle that you could bring into the copywriting. So to go back to our draft case study, how we've kind of top and tailed this is to say, look, wheels on racks of shelving, they're not the most glamorous, most high-tech item, but what they are is an extremely robust solution to this problem, this fundamental problem. To go back to the beginning of, what is the fundamental pattern of a farm. So it's all about that crop yield per square footage of floor space. And if you think, what is the floor space going to cost in, say, central London? Then you could start to quantify that. Maybe you could show some rents in different parts of the country, in key cities, London, Cardiff, Manchester or something. And you could start to say, well, okay, just by having this quite simple and thoughtful design solution of wheels on shelving on your racks, you're starting to gain very serious improvements given your fixed costs, your capital costs of rent and so on. So ultimately, more crop yield equals greater profit for our farmers. And then you could talk about the system itself rather than just diving straight into, okay, the VF52007 and the VF5222, 5222. So obviously this brochure is probably intended for a technical audience, so people will already be familiar with the general kind of benefits of these systems, but nothing in here really tells you about, what is the benefit of the VF5207 in terms of how it translates right down into making the most of floor space for potentially a high rent area. So you would finish this off with a clear call to action as ever, and also distinguish the product from similar products that other vertical farmers make. So just lastly, what I would say with vertical farming, it's a relatively new sector, and some companies will kind of trade quite heavily on that in itself, the newness factor. And I would say you want to go a little bit further and not just use the general idea of vertical farming being new and exciting and interesting, but you need to distinguish specifically why your approach is unique in the market or different to all the other approaches out there. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. That's just a quick case study, and I'm going to dig into vertical farming a bit more in the future because it's a very interesting sector, and I think it's something that the UK leads in generally.